From the Museum of Old Newbury. It is my great pleasure to be here with all of you, and it is such a privilege to be here at St. Paul's Church. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank Bronson and the whole team here for opening up this space to us. It's just, we have a lot of really wonderful partners in churches in this community and all the work we do, and we're just really grateful for that. So thank you so much to St. Paul's. Let's give a round of applause, everyone. I speak for James as well when I say we would like to thank also our board, our volunteers, and you who keep showing up for whatever crazy thing we decide to do. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. So the events that began last February that commemorate and celebrate the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution, along with many other exciting events across the state, are sponsored by the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism as part of their Mass 250 campaign. We are very grateful to be one of the communities chosen for the second year in a row to tell our revolutionary story. We had just shy of 10,000 people join us last year for our Revolutionary War events. That's in person. There's many, many tens of thousands more that have joined us virtually.
Have fun.
And I think we will probably
Thank
do
you.
this year. So we're very grateful for their support. The grant that sponsors these events is a partnership with the Custom House Maritime Museum, Lowell's Boat Shop, Newburyport Chamber of Commerce, North of Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau, several churches, and every single one of you. So thank you so much. I will say, this is the second year of this grant. We didn't know there was going to be a second year of the grant, and so we very aggressively applied for the first year of the grant, confidently claiming that Newburyport was very, very important in 1775 before the first privateer hit the water. And then we had to scramble to prove ourselves right, and gosh, did we ever. What an incredible story, the stories that have been unearthed, the partnerships, the events that have taken place over the last year have just been deeply gratifying, and we've unearthed some incredible information. So I would also like to invite all of you to keep that momentum going. Next month, on March 6th, we will be looking at Loyalists, prisoners in the home front. On April 3rd, we are welcoming Nina Sankovic, who's an incredible writer and speaker, who is going to be speaking about American rebels, Hancock, Quincy, and Adams families, all of whom have ties to Newburyport because it is the center of the universe. Okay, and then on March 23rd, so this is actually sort of in between, we have just finalized the slate of speakers for a one-day symposium with evening entertainments hosted by Theater in the Open, Edward Speck, who's going to be doing party tricks. 18th century tavern party tricks, we're not sure exactly what, but we do know the Porterman will be there. We've got some incredible musicians, so you're going to want to take the whole day and possibly the next morning off. So you can come be with us on March 23rd. The head of the Prize Papers project at the National Archives in London will be coming to talk about all of the Newburyport vessels that are represented in the papers that were seized from privateers at sea. It's the first time she's ever spoken about this project in the United States, so we're incredibly excited about that, and many other speakers as well. And then the culmination of this grant is going to be on July 19th with a community commemoration of the arrival of the Declaration of Independence. And it was read from the Meeting House, which at the time was in Market Square, on July 19th. So we're cooking up some fun but really powerful commemorations for that notable event. So without further ado, we're going to do the introduction chain. I'm going to pass this over to James Russell, who is going to introduce our wonderful speaker.
Thank you, Bethany. Hello, everybody. Luke Nicole Labrie. He is manager of the Educational and Interpretational Programs in Quebec at the National Museum there. And not only does he have 20 people who teach the Educational and Interpretation Programs, but they have over 70,000 students, kids, and teenagers that come a year, and they're instructed both in French and English. So it's absolutely a phenomenal achievement. And this is I thought it was a little audacious to invite somebody from Canada to the US, and sure enough, he did balk. But then we said we'd actually pay him money to come, and so I was thrilled that we could actually bring a Canadian south of the border. With that said, I think what you're going to hear tonight is a very different perspective. I think you're going to hear a perspective, both a slightly tinged French perspective and also Loyal's perspective on what we've been talking about over the past 2 years. So I encourage you to sit back, put your elbows up, and please welcome Luc Nicole Lebré.
I can take this one. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. Special thank you, of course, to the Customs House and the Museum of Old Newbury as well for having me here, especially because it's with them that I talked a bit. And I want to go on with this presentation tonight that I hope will keep you on the edge of your seat. It's called Quebec 1775-1776, The Last Siege. It will make sense because for us in Quebec, the American invasion and the Battle of Quebec of December 31st, 1775 was the last time the city was ever directly attacked on the ground. So this is the reason why it's called the last siege. It is a symbol of all that happened then and all that happened after as well. So it's important to keep that in mind, all right? This will inform and fuel my perspective here. So, quick word, our plan for the evening. I will start to talk a little bit about myself. Very quickly, so just so you know that where I'm coming from and also why this perspective that I'm going to bring might be a little bit different is that I work in Quebec City. I work for the Plains of Abraham. I've been there for 19 years now. I know the place in and out. As James was saying, I am in charge of the team of interpreters that we have on field, but also doing the historical research for our exhibitions and these educational activities. So I think I have a unique point of view in talking about that. So I know a lot about the history, about the sources. I've read them, well, probably not all, but I've read a good chunk of them, about the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, but also about the American invasions and the Battle of Quebec. So it's the Plains of Abraham that I work for. So as some of you might hear, oh, it's the name of a battle. Yes, of course, 1759, that's the French and Indian War. So this is our main focus, keep in mind, but there's our important links. So this is also the reason why we decided to do this special exhibition that Mr. Russell was talking about. And last but not least, I wanted a quick word. My full name is Luc, so that's my first name, and my family name is Nicole Labrie. So as you can hear, that's very French sounding. It's because French is my first language. So if at any point in time tonight you say, oh, that was a weird way of saying that specific word, it's possible. I just want to warn you with that. So in no way, shape, or form, I should be able. I've been speaking English for a couple of years now, and I think my accent is passable. But please keep that in mind when we are going to discuss this as well. But for the rest of our presentation, the plan is going to be this. I'm going to talk a little bit historical context to begin. So 1775 in Canada and in the 13 colonies. So I'll skim very fast about the 13 colonies. This is something you might know better. Canada is going to be much more important. And when I say Canada, it's important and it's also historically accurate. Canada was the name that the French gave, because of the First Nations, that the French gave to the valley of the St. Lawrence River, which is the area where most of the people were living in what was referred to as the Province of Quebec. So the British colony in 1763, so at the time of the Revolutionary War, was the Province of Quebec also, which is, just to help us, the name of the province today, but it changed name in between. And in Quebec, the capital of Quebec is the city Quebec, so that's fun. When you want to try to understand all that, but we'll try to keep it simple today. Then I'm going to talk about what happened during the fall of 1775. So Montgomery's attack, and so I'm talking about Richard Montgomery's road to Quebec and Benedict Arnold's expedition. So a quick overview then again of Arnold's expedition. Then a word about the Battle of Quebec, so December 31st, 1775. Then what happens in the spring, because even though, well, you lost. I'm sorry, the Continental Army lost. Let's not get into the specifics of that. But even though the Continental Army lost, they stayed in the area of Quebec for a couple of months afterwards, right? So things happened then, so I'll try to talk about that as well. And last but not least, about the consequences. And as you, so those who are very close to me, those at the back, don't worry, you won't miss anything if you cannot read what's like on the slides. But what I wrote right on the side of consequences was failing upward. Now you said, well, we failed the invasion. Yes, you failed the invasion. Well, the Continental Army did. But in the end, keep in mind, it helped quite a lot with the rest of Revolutionary War, that defeat. So we'll talk about that as well. So let us begin. So 1775 in Canada. Just so you know as well, you might see those who will get a good view of the artwork. These are pieces of art that were in our exhibit. So at the Museum of the Plains of Abraham in Quebec. So if you say, oh, I have no idea what's going on, that's normal. Most of these are not historical pieces, but there are a few here and there. So we start 1775 in Quebec. It is 15 years after the Battle of Sainte-Foy. It is 12 years after the Royal Proclamation and what will then become, the birth of the British colonies. Just 12 years. When the British colonies were created in Quebec, keep in mind that the British authorities decided that first, French was not a language you could speak anymore. So they decided that English was going to be the language for the whole population. They decided that the Catholic religion, that the Roman Catholic faith could not be a faith if you wanted to have any sort of power, authority, or hold any job of importance. So they decided that as well. So for the population, and they basically axed all the lordships that were there in the colony. So basically the way of living of every single inhabitant of Canada from 1762 to 1763 changed drastically. In practice, so that's the theory, right? In practice, starting with the first British governor, who's James Murray. It's important to remember that Murray was a general with the invading British force in 1759, and he was named commander-in-chief of that force after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, because Wolfe died, because Townsend, another one of the brigadiers, was sent back in England, because Robert Monckton, who was the most senior officer, was badly wounded and went back to New York. So Murray, who was one of the brigadiers, was in charge. And he realized something, that, oh, it's all good and swell and jolly, all these rules that the British want to impose, but keep in mind, this is Quebec. This is the capital of a new colony, and this is about isolated 6 months a year. So if you want to survive here, well, you can certainly decide that you want all the population to speak a different language and have a different religion and live in a completely different fashion, but in practice, well, you have to, let's say, be a little bit more mellower, I would say, in the way you will rule. And this is going to be very important because this will inform what's going to come next. Not only that, but also keep in mind that when I say that the 13 colonies grow weary, is that it's a war. So the Battle of the Plains of Abraham and that war is a war that heavily involved the colonies, right? The role of the 13 colonies was very important during the French and Indian War. So was the role of New France. Just to give you an idea, New France, about 1/3 of the population. I'm not saying of men. I'm not saying of grown men. I'm saying 1/3 of the whole population of New France was enrolled in the militia. In the end, it's all grown men, right? But it's 1/3 of the population. It's huge numbers. You can find in any wars that you want around the world, it's very unusual to have the numbers as high as that. So the population was very involved. Same thing could be said, well, not to the same numbers, but in the colonies, in the 13 colonies, there was a lot of, participation as well, right? So this is important. And 13 colonies grow wary because they believe that they did not have, well, this is a cause of the Revolutionary War, so they believe that they did not get, their fair shares of the victory. They wanted territory. In the end, the British Crown decided to leave these territories for the First Nations. Well, to the great displeasures of many of the governors of the 13 colonies, imagine. They wanted a safe, colony, the province of Quebec, a safe colony in the north. They started to realize that, hey, people can still speak French and have their Roman Catholic religion. That's not what we paid for. That's not what we got in for. So keep in mind, there is a wariness, not because you don't want them to have their religion as much as, well, it's a threat. There are other people, they don't have the same culture, they might get to war with us again. So this is part of it, right? There's another number of laws. As I said, I will not get too much into that. Keep in mind the Canadiens, so the population French, they cope with the British as well. So there's a wariness there as well. Are they happy that yesterday's enemy are their leaders? They're not. They cope with it as best as they can. So it's not great. Like what happened in 1763 with the creation of the Province of Quebec, with the end of the war, is not great for anyone. It's not great in the north, it's not great in the 13 colonies, certainly not. Leads to the intolerable acts, won't get into that too much. And finally, leads to the Continental Congress getting together in the 13 colonies. And what they will do, what they will start to do right at the first Congress, but at the second Congress even more so, they will know that the province of Quebec is a problem. And their answer to that is to write letters to the population. So the Continental Congresses will write 3 separate letters to the population, basically asking, depending on how you read it, nearly begging the population to join them if in face of a despotic tyrant who was basically imposing their views. And in your case, oh, fellow brethrens of the Catholic faith, French speakers, you know very well how they are imposing their views, right? So it's very, it's very heartfelt as a letter. And these letters are going to be widely distributed. And I'm talking about the second letter specifically because the second letter is distributed in the summer of 1775. It is going to be translated by merchants in Montreal. It's going to be printed, and there's at least 1,000 copies that are going to be circulated in different parishes. All right? So there's lots of things that happens on the ground. So this is an image of the Second Continental Congress. All the while, they are telling the French population, the inhabitants of Canada, that, well, stay on the edge, make ready, we want your liberty as much as you certainly want it. At the Second Continental Congress, it's going to be the creation of the Continental Army. Well, you can certainly say that you don't want to go to war and you want a peaceful resolution, but when you are at the step where you decide to create an army, well, it sends mixed messages, at best. They will appoint a veteran of the French and Indian War, a man who fought during the French and Indian War, George Washington. People here, I'm sure, don't like to be reminded of that, but his sole defeat Now, I know the arguments that he was convinced and he could not read the surrendering of Fort Necessity, but well. Anyway, but a highly decorated military officer was appointed as the leader of that Continental Army, right? And he will have the province of Quebec in mind pretty quickly. Even if at the same time they will decide, the Second Continental Congress, to send the olive branch petition to the Parliament in Europe, well, they still prepare for war in the background. So this is very important. It cannot be justified. I'm not getting into the specifics of that too much, because what's coming up next is much more interesting. Is that right at the beginning of all these tribulations. In the summer of 1775, one of the very first thing that George Washington will do is actually they will discuss a plan to invade Canada. The reason for that is threefold. There are three reasons basically to invade Canada. First reason, and that's kind of I would say, let's call it the worst case scenario or like the bare minimum that you could hope for, is that the province of Quebec, in case of a war, would still be the main point of entry for British troops in North America. You want to make sure strategically that the British do not have this point of entry. It makes complete sense, right? So that's the first basic objective. But there's another second objective, is to say, well, best case scenario, they will join us. It's going to be way easier, won't have to fight as much. They will do their dirty work in Canada. And they will join. It's going to be 14 colonies, and who knows, we'll get rid later of the Papists and Roman Catholics. That doesn't matter too much for now. It was discussed. But keep in mind, as the strategies, it's basically, they'll join, and that's going to be easier for us. We'll have, like, our hands are going to be free. That's good. And there's a third reason, basically, to invade Canada at that very moment, as early as that in the war, is that in case that the war goes definitely not as we planned, if we succeed, this is going to be the ultimate bargaining chip, right? And it has been known in history. Don't worry, in Europe, they were doing this all the time. During the French and Indian War, they did that. Like, of course, the British won the Plains of Abraham in 1759, but the French won in 1760, the Battle of Sainte-Foy, on the plains as well. The British kept the city. Why? Because France was getting their collective behinds handed to them in Europe. And they had no way of negotiating anything of value. So they had to give away New France. So that's what it makes. That's why it happened, and that's what very early in the summer of 1775, we planned the invasion. So the first invasion, the main route, is invading, reaching Montreal, then Quebec, through Lake Champlain. That was the idea, right? That was the main plan. They were not hiding it at all. For that, they first give the command to a general named Philip Schuyler. Philip Schuyler is probably much more well-known in the south of the border than he is north of the border, right? Because Philip Schuyler basically never invaded Canada. He took a few steps in Canada, fell sick, had to retreat. So the command basically fell on his command, who's the man we see on this image right here. On your right, is Richard Montgomery. Okay, Montgomery at that time was basically managing his land. If I remember, it's in the colony of New York. He has a farm, and basically things are going well, but he dreams for glory, right? So he will sign up to become an officer for this force of invasion and will be picked as second in command. The invasion is going to take a very specific route. They are going to leave from Ticonderoga. Keep in mind that at that moment, Ticonderoga, Upper New York, so Ticonderoga, New York, which was Fort Carillon in the French time up to 1758, was one of the major forts that there were in the northern, colonies on the side of Lake Champlain, had been captured earlier in the spring by Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen. So it was a good starting point for an invasion. We are early, let's say, in the month of August. The troops are getting together, but we know that it takes a few weeks. And then, after leaving Ticonderoga, they will capture Crown Point, then a fort called Île-aux-Noix. So this is on the Richelieu River, so we are south of Montreal, but in the province of Quebec. But the main objective, the main garrison, was Fort Saint-Jean. Fort Saint-Jean, which was heavily, they had a lot of soldiers, a few hundred soldiers, which was a lot for southern Quebec at the time. And it's their main problem. But to make Saint-Jean surrender, they will be able to make Chambly surrender, which is a link between Fort Saint-Jean and the city of Montreal. So right in between, so we're October 18th, to give you an idea. So we left late in August, and it's just October 18th that you make, first of all, Chambly fall, And then they will capture Fort Saint-Jean only on November the 3rd and finally reach Montreal on November the 13th. If you think quite a bit, at the beginning of the war, many of the soldiers, many of the volunteers that signed up in this first Continental Army decided to sign a contract. That contract for many of them was valid up until December 31st. This took you quite a while. You're in a bit of a rush. But if, as Montgomery thinks, he's not alone, he might have a chance. Because there's another man we need to discuss a little bit about, and it's that man, Benedict Arnold. Arnold was ambitious for sure. At that time, he was a convinced patriot. At that time, this is not, well, you know what's going to happen anyway. But in 1775, convinced patriot. And early in the year, when he actually was able to capture Ticonderoga, they went all the way to Montreal. And in the spring 1775, Benedict Arnold was able to go to Montreal on his own, not with an army, not with an invading force, but he saw how weak the garrison was. And he heard that the garrison was even weaker in Québec City, the capital of the province of Quebec. So basically, all while these discussions in July, in June and July were happening to have a main invasion force, Benedict Arnold was able to go to General Washington and basically tell him, well, I have an idea. The idea is going to be this. Give me a force, a small force. We are going to walk up through northern Massachusetts, today's Maine. We are going to strike Quebec. There's going to be no one there. And we're going to capture like you take an apple, a ripe apple, right from the tree, right? That's going to be that easy. Basically, that was his speech. And that's what he did. And he was able to convince Washington to tell him that. So Schuyler, Montgomery were aware that there was this second invasion. And the plan was all good because keep in mind that if they decide to sail up the coast and go close to northern Massachusetts, the idea was that, well, they were not invading Quebec. They were invading the next best thing, Nova Scotia. Then again, to spread the defenses. So that's the idea here. That's the logic. That's the objective, I would say, to put that thought in the minds of the British officers and the preparation. So he contacts Washington, as I say, and he will start to recruit volunteers, because this is also based on volunteers alone, that basically are going to be seduced by the idea of glory. Keep in mind, this is the middle of the 18th century. Capturing a city is probably as glorious as you can get. This is a big selling point for an expedition like this, okay? So there is a diversion towards Nova Scotia, and the expedition is supposed to go, if you were looking at the maps that, by the way, a loyalist map maker in Massachusetts gave to Arnold, which were not necessarily as accurate as you could hope for. But on these maps, you had about a trek of 180 miles. That trek of 180 miles was supposed to take 20 days. That's the plan. This is the idea that has been sold. On its way, he recruits volunteers in Cambridge and in Massachusetts in general. He will get ship in Newburyport, and with these ships, he will basically sail up the coast, sail up the Kennebec River, and then traverse to Chaudière River in southern province of Quebec, and get on Quebec. The final approval goes on September 2nd, 1775. He will finish to buy supplies in Cambridge, and then he will be on his merry way. The expedition is basically, I'll try to get closer because it's not going to be very... The orange line you kind of see here is the expedition as a whole. But I will try to do a quick overview of how it's going down. 20 days, 180 miles. Let's start with that. So he leaves Cambridge, right by Boston, right here, on September the 11th, 1775. Makes his way by land to Newburyport. He arrives here, the ships that he asked for are not to the quality that he expected. Takes a few extra days. to build extra ships, new ships, and they will finally leave Newburyport on September 19th. He needs to sail upriver all the way up to the Quebec River, up the coast, sorry, and it's going to take a little bit more time than he expected because he will finally arrive in Fort Western. I'd say September 21st are the first men that arrive in Fort Western. This is actually not that far from the coast on the Quebec River, but they will need to wait for a couple of days for the last soldiers of his 1,100 men to reach Fort Western. At Fort Western, if you calculated, so far we're nearly 2 weeks in of the 20-day trek. So that leaves him 6 days to go in the wilderness of northern Massachusetts. Look at that. It's easy. It's a 6 hours drive to Quebec. I know. I did it this morning. Different times, right? He arrives there, and the cracks are starting to show, because right at Fort Western there will be not skirmishing between his troops. We know, for example, that one of his troops decided to shoot. One of the soldiers decided to fire at one of the colonists that was in a house there. He shot him through the door. The man died. He was tried, court-martialed. He was supposed to be hanged, but in the end, they decided not to hang him and let General Washington decide the fate of that poor man. But still, you see, this is not you're pretty early in the trip to have this in fighting and this kind of behavior. So discipline was not going great, and things were not on the up and up. On September 27, they reach Fort Halifax, which is just slightly north on the Quebec River, and they will reach Norridgewock Falls, which is the last settlement between October 2nd and October 9th. October 9th, for the last troop that reached that last settlement, is nearly a month in. Things are not looking good, because when you start to think about October 9 in northern Maine, it starts to get a little bit chilly. There is wind. There is rain. There is all these fun parts. And keep in mind, they are not driving. They're on the Quebec River. It's a different adventure. But from Norridgewock Falls, they needed to get their best game in, because the next major step and the first major hurdle, and they knew that was coming, is the Great Carrying Place. And basically, the Great Carrying Place is a portage, so a carrying of the canoes, of the bateaux that you need to do. You have an elevation of over 1,000 meters between the lowest and the highest point. It will take them a good 4 days to complete this great carrying, to complete the travel from the Great Carrying Place. This was supposed to take them from Quebec River to Dead River. Now, those of you who are uninformed could say, well, Dead River, it's because it's dead. It's so fun. It's a quiet river. It's smooth sailing there. It's not. The Great Carrying Place, the cracks were starting to show even more, because this is the first moments, we are mid-October, that they start to deal with flash floods. They start to deal with rain. They start to deal with, and the encampments, they start to lose lots and lots of supplies. It's not looking good. Diseases is starting to get into the troops, and this is really after a month in where you start to feel that it's going to be hard. On Dead River, a little bit more, so you're not even in the province of Quebec yet. It's going to be one of the major turning point of that expedition is going to be Colonel Roger Enos's retreat. Because keep in mind, you have 1,100 men who start this expedition, and around the 23rd, 24th of October, about 450 of these men will decide to retreat. Why? No supplies, diseases, injuries because of the flash floods that I was talking about, because of the Great Carrying Place that was so challenging, because the Dead River was so unforgiving as well. So this takes them a while. At the end, it's very telling, because Enos was going to be court-martialed when he comes back to Cambridge and Boston, right? But before he comes back, the other troops that stays behind, I don't remember the name of the soldier who has that, but one of the person in the party basically tells on October 24th that the remaining soldier wishes for Colonel Enos's troops and himself to die a painful death. And they pray for that because they were such holy men, I guess. They pray for that because he says that he basically did a cowardly thing. For the story, keep in mind that Enos was tried by a court-martial, but he was not found guilty of being a coward at that moment. They will reach Lac Mégantic. So Lake Mégantic, this is truly in the south of the province of Quebec. It's a big lake, and it's basically the entry point to the Chaudière River on October the 27th. So that's 1 month and a half after the expedition left Cambridge. Just to give you an idea, at that point, we had supplies for 20 days. How are the supplies? They're gone. So the next couple of days are going to be very interesting. When they start their trek on Chaudière River, before reaching the settlement of Sartigan. Sartigan is a city today in Quebec, which is called Saint-Georges. So it's pretty on the south. It's about, let's say, half an hour to an hour from the border with Maine, just to give you an idea where it is today. So that was the first settlement, right? And before arriving there, they, in many colorful ways, will describe their situation. They will eat one of the officers' dogs that was with them. It's also an interesting moment that I could try to do some sort of a historical quiz with you here. If you could tell me, for example, what is the common ground between leather shoes, buckle shoes, let's say cartridge boxes, leathered cartridge boxes, lip balm, and poultice for let's say, skin rashes. What's the common ground for that? With that, at that point in the expedition, all of these 4 things were edible. So, yes, this is described in colorful ways in various journals. If you want, for myself, the most, I was about to say something very bad. The most enlightening, I would say, journal about this time, I strongly recommend reading Dr. Isaac Santer's journal about the Arnold's expedition. He's a doctor. He's very colorful in his way of describing what's happening there. They will finally end with the last portage on Etchemin River. So that's on the south shore of Quebec, a few miles away from the city. But this is because the Chaudière reaches the south shore, but there's a large waterfall before you reach actually Québec City. As opposed to Etchemin, you have a few small rapids here and there, but it's very easy to do this. And we are November the 9th. So 2 months, the 180 miles that was supposed to happen was in fact 350 miles that they, ultimately carried. Most of them were volunteers. There were some First Nations guys that were with the troops for nearly the whole duration of it, right? And they were able, as far as we know, to survive it. What's really tricky and unfair is that, and I'm not saying it's not a problem with the Continental Army, it is a problem with historical documents in the 18th century, is that we don't know the extent of what they actually did, because they probably saved the Continental Army soldiers a lot of time during this moment, because they were the ones who actually had the knowledge of that. When they arrive in Quebec, you have to understand on the South Shore, they will also get help from the Abenaki tribe, Abenaki Nation, as we refer to them in the province of Quebec, that will actually sell them new boats and ships to actually cross. And finally, on November the 13th, they will cross the St. Lawrence River, and on November the 14th, you have about 600 men. They are cold because they don't have winter coats and garments. They are hungry, and they will get on the Plains of Abraham and ask for the surrender of the city. Keep in mind, in Benedict Arnold's mind, there is no garrison in the city of Quebec. Well, at that moment, he was wrong. So, in Quebec, keep in mind that the British had been busy. They asked for the militia to group up, but we'll get into that. When the Continental Army arrived, the first headquarters, so this is the historic city of Quebec. Those of you who don't know it, this is the St. Lawrence River. So the city of Quebec is built on heights. It's built on a promontory, so basically on a big rock. And you have a fortified city on top of that rock. So this is the upper part of the city, the heights, the plains of Abraham as it is known. But north of there, you can see a river, which is called St. Charles River. This is basically lowlands as well, right? So the first thing that they do, they will get on from right this area, which is Foulon's Cove. They get on the plains of Abraham. They come to approximately that place on November the 13th, and they ask for the city's surrender, and the British laugh. And and that's clearly nearly what happened for real. And then they make their way back to Meneu's Inn. That was a small inn. Alexandre Meneu was a man close to the British, even though he was French, who had an inn close to St. Charles River. So he goes there, they go there, and they will set up their first headquarters, temporary headquarters there. So this is mid-November 1775. They will also stop at the General Hospital, which is right there. General Hospital was a place where you could get, of course, your body fixed in a way. But it's a hospital. It's much more for indigent or people who were basically homeless in the city of Quebec than people who were actually sick. So the sisters, the nuns there, actually saw these poor men arrive. And when you read their documents as well, they are impressed that these men crossed the colonies and made their way to Quebec. And they were like, oh, wow, they don't look good. So, but because they are Christian, good Roman Catholic nuns, they will take care of them as well, equally as the British. Same thing they did, by the way, in 1759, right? They took care of the French as well as the British as well. So that's only 15 years later. So it brings out fresh memories for many of the congregation that is there. Montgomery will finally reach Quebec City early December, around December the 3rd. So at that point, it's going to be like morale is going to improve, because you can imagine the 600 or so soldiers who reached Quebec with Arnold's were very discouraged, right? When Montgomery arrives, he brings fresh food. They had food at that moment, but more importantly, he brings winter coats that they had seized from storages in the Montreal area. So this is going to be a very good boost to the morale of the Continental Army at that point. They will still use Meneu's Inn, so at the west, but they will even go farther west to try to organize. For example, they will use a house which is called Holland House, which is west of Quebec. Samuel Holland was a British military officer that had a big farm, and they will basically use this house throughout the siege as well. But now we are mid-December, so they say, okay, when Montgomery arrives, he asks Arnold, hey, like this is a recreation, I'm sure it's 100% how it happened. Hey, Benedict, how come the city has not fallen? Well, because there's a militia now in the city, 1,200 men strong, 300 militiamen who were speaking English, 900 were speaking French speakers, so they were working together. That's a surprise. Well, he said, how come they did not all take our side? Oh, some did. Some of the men and women from the colony decided to take the side of the Continental Army. But they were not super enthusiastic about that. First, because, well, remember, it's the enemy just of yesterday, right? So, yeah, of course, you want to give us liberty and freedom, that's good and all, and we are going to sell you supplies, that's good and all. Now, can you pay for the supplies? And they were saying, oh, yes, we'll pay in paper money. Paper money was not good money. Paper money, just 15 years prior, was handed by both the French and the British, and most of the inhabitants never saw the color of that money. So you can imagine when the Continental Army arrives and tells them, well, good, you're on our side. Thank you very much for the supplies. Here is paper money for your trouble, and we'll see you in a couple of months after we capture the city of Quebec. That's a tough sell. So many people will not be thrilled about the way it's going on. So Montgomery will decide that they will need to besiege the city because the city does not fall into their hands. But this is December. When you besiege a fortified city like the city of Quebec, what you want normally is artillery. But you don't have necessarily place to dig trenches and get your cannons in the proper place. So what's going to be the next best thing? They will decide to build an ice battery. So basically with snow and ice. You think snow and ice can sustain heavy cannon fire? No, it cannot. So about 5 days after they decide to build that ice battery, they will shut it down, basically. So it will be there from mid-December, basically 1 week in December. The suburbs, so this is also in December, the suburbs will fall into heavy fire, but not fire from the Continental Army, mostly from the British. The British will decide the own suburbs of the city of Quebec. Now you say, why is that? Well, because the Continental Army were using the houses that were outside the city walls as places to attack. So, well, the British were not thrilled with that, so they literally razed large swaths of the suburbs of Quebec. They fired heavy cannon fire on many, in both St. John's suburbs, so on the highest part of the city, but Saint-Roch. So this is the northernmost one that you see there. At this moment, for the Continental Army, there are three major concerns. The contracts, of course. The weather. The weather can be a positive, though. Because yes, it's snowing. But because we are so few of us, at that point about 1,500 men, tops, maybe 1,200, snow could be a cover. So if we want to attack, we might need a snowstorm, a blizzard. So let's wait for the snow, right? But the major concern was smallpox. Smallpox was running wild in the Continental Army. You were saying, well, but in the colonies, we don't have that many smallpox epidemics. That's true. Way less than in England. But in England, that meant that the soldiers and the men who were there had already caught smallpox for the most part. And were somewhat immune to smallpox, because this is a very interesting disease. If you catch smallpox once and you survive, you're immune to it. As if you've never had smallpox before, well, it's up to 30% of death because of that. So it can be an issue, and it definitely was an issue because of poor food, because of the weather, because the proximity of the camp, of the life in the camp, all right? So this is what happens on the Continental Army, but on the side of the British, there's a number of things. I told you the militia, 1,200 men. There's also a movement that is controlling the city. We are in September. So imagine, September 11, Arnold leaves, right? And they believe it's going to be a surprise. Well, in September, it's about the 28th September or so, the British authorities will declare that the gates of the city will be shut at night. The British authorities start to control every single person coming in and out of the city. So that means that if you're new in the city, you will be controlled by the British authority. What's your purpose here? Why are you here? For how long? These are the types of questions that you do not necessarily have in a city that was not under, at a threat of war, right? So they will decide that. They will do the same thing with the ships. Because there is a number, not the majority, but a number of people who are very sympathetic to the cause of the Continental Army in the city of Quebec, as well as Montreal. But keep in mind, the closer you are to Quebec, the closer you are to power, the more, I would say, the closer to the British the population generally is, because they see the power in action, and it's kind of softer power than in other places. And it finally will end, this preparation, in November, on the November 22nd. So that's 1 week after Arnold arrived. Montgomery is not even in the city of Quebec. The Governor General of the colony, Guy Carleton, will basically tell everyone who is believed or suspected to be a sympathizer of the rebels, so of the Patriots, but of the rebels, will be jailed. You have till December the 1st to leave the city. And in a city like Quebec, with less than 10,000 inhabitants, everyone knew who was a sympathizer or not. Everyone knew whose sympathies were whose. So when he basically has that in the newspaper of the city, well, he was that close to give a list of names, right? You knew that you were a real, actual target at that time, so they left the city. The sympathizer left the city. That does not mean there is no sympathy, because the Continental Army will be able to raise extra Continental regiments in Quebec. 2 of these actually will be raised. The 1st Canadian Regiment will have around 200 men around the city of Quebec. Mostly men from Quebec, from people who were Acadians or First Nations joined the 1st Canadian Regiment. There was a 2nd Canadian Regiment. Officially, it was raised in 1776 by a man named Moses Hazen. Hazen is very interesting. He was at first a loyalist, but he was suspected of being a sympathizer. He was thrown in jail for 2 months, and he basically said, all right, your mind is set, I'm switching sides. And he raised the regiment himself as well, of about 150 men, the Congress's own regiment, which was raised and which take part in many actions during the war. At first, you might say, well, they were, French-Canadian sympathizers. Were they, because of what I told you, the money part, were they really involved, or were they really invested in the cause for the Continental Army? They were. Let me read you an excerpt from Moses Hazen's letter to General Washington. This is on November 30th, 1779. About the Canadian regiment, he says that the Canadian soldiers are not inferior to any in the regiment in point of morality, bravery, or attachment to the cause and service in which they are engaged. A proof of which one Canadian only has deserted since the regiment retreated out of Canada. And it's a good point of pride in a way for many people in Quebec to have ancestors who joined the army, and there are examples of men who actually left the province of Quebec and actually settled in the 13 colonies, then what are going to become the United States at that time. So there were people who were steadfast allies, convinced of the cause of the Continental Army there as well. But for many Canadians, I was saying, it was simply wait. On the one hand, many don't want to support the British government. On the other, they don't trust yesterday's enemy, the 13 colonies, who don't even seem to have our money to pay them. This gets us to the Battle of Quebec on December 31st, 1759. The idea was this. When was the contract of many of the volunteers ending? December 31st. You're good. Love that. People in Quebec never get that. That's not true. I'm just trying to boost your egos. They're listening as well. Don't worry. I mean, they get it. So this is the plan of attack. You have a city like this that you need to try to capture. You have a fortification, actual stone fortification. Keep in mind that today, Quebec City is the only walled city north of Mexico. These walls are thick, these walls are strong, these walls were built by the French, of course. But for both Arnold and Montgomery, well, the plan was simple. A strong head-first attack on the city wall was impossible. First, they did not have the men. Second, they mostly did not have the artillery to succeed with that. You need artillery to capture a city like this. So they will need diversion. Remember I talked about the weather? They will say, okay, we need a snowstorm, an actual blizzard to cover our tracks, who we are, where we are. So the objective is going to be this. First, plan of attack. Here's what we are going to do. We are going to have diversion on the plains. You remember these Canadian regiments? The 1st Canadian Regiment, the men of Moses Hazen, let's send them first. Like before the break of day, we'll send them, they will attack the city walls, all right? Then we'll send flares. When they attack the city walls, of course the garrison is going to rush the city walls and they're going to be all there. We'll send flares, and then here's what we are going to do. Myself, Montgomery, I will go down south of the city, walk on the side of the St. Lawrence River, make our way through the King's Yard and reach La Place Royale. So basically a main marketplace in the bottom of Quebec City. Then at the same time, flares go up. Benedict Arnold takes about another part, a few hundred men as well. So they both have a few hundred men under their commands. Benedict Arnold goes north in the suburb, close to the cliff, makes his way in the neighborhood that is there. Urban warfare is going to ensue, but they are going to use the cover of the snow and make their way to Place Royale. And from Place Royale, basically, they can scale the cliff and attack the governor's palace that is right there. If you capture the governor's palace, you capture the seat of power, you capture the city of Quebec, they will have to surrender. This is going to be super easy. Well. So what's going to happen? Let's start with Montgomery. The diversions work great, all right? Flares are going up. Montgomery's attack. He gets down the heights of Abraham, follows the St. Lawrence River, heads down, going south. He follows the base of the cliff right to the side of the river, and he needs to cross a few barricades right after the King's Wharf. He crosses the first barricade with his vanguard. He wants to be in front, right? He wants to show the example of his soldiers who will be out of a contract before the end of the day. So he crosses that first barricade, waits for the rest of his soldiers to come. Then with his vanguard, all his senior officers, they're about 20 to 30 men, they will try to get to that second barricade that they see right in front of them. Keep in mind, this is lower Quebec City, so at that point there are houses. The barricades were built most of the time between houses where the streets were located. They get to a second barricade. They're like, okay, let's force it. There were British soldiers in a garrison house just on the side of that second barricade. They start to hear the Continental Army trying to breach that barricade. They open a door, they fire a cannon with grape shot, so anti-personnel ammunition. And Montgomery, from what we heard, has been struck at least three times, by the grape shot. All his senior officers will be shot and killed on site as well. So basically, the whole commanding group of Montgomery's attack falls right in the first minute of this attack. And the rest of his, like the most senior officer, will basically ask this group to retreat. That's going to be the end of Montgomery's army. Montgomery is actually going to be buried a couple of days after the battle, right inside the city walls of Quebec. But he's not there anymore. He's in New York now. So after, in the 19th century, the United States asked to get Montgomery's remains back. And they were sent back to the United States and properly buried, all right? But keep in mind, he was properly buried for a senior commanding officer at that time in the city. Still, he passed quite quickly. Arnold's adventure, though, is urban warfare. So this is different. It's urban warfare. He knows that he's going to have combat in the streets. There are much more, from what they know, it's closer to the suburbs, much more inhabited. So he launches attack from the plains again, heads down north of the heights. He follows the cliff to avoid musket fires. Keep in mind, at this moment, it takes him more time than Montgomery. So the time he starts to do that, they hope that the diversion is going to work, but it's not working. Pretty quickly, the British realize that there's only a few hundred soldiers, probably 300 soldiers total on the plains. They're never going to breach the wall, so they leave a few soldiers to watch these Continental Army soldiers on the plains, but they will quickly decide to regroup and start to go where the real trouble is. The news will get very quickly that Montgomery fell, so the news is going north to go in front of Benedict Arnold's attack. Arnold's tried to walk in the streets of the city. They will have ladders. They will try to get into buildings. They will be pushed back. It's going to be very hard. Arnold himself is going to be wounded. They will have a cannon with them. So wounded in the leg, he has to retreat. He needs to leave the cannon at one place, so no more artillery for them. Daniel Morgan, who was Benedict Arnold's commander-in-second, decides to take the command at that very moment, and he will push forward. They will strike down a first barricade. Morgan wants all his soldiers there with him, right? So he breaks down a few, at least one, maybe two barricades, and they will get to a place where today, in the city of Quebec, if you go there, the street is called Barricade Street. Let's try to guess where this is going. Takes its time. Snowstorms raging. Soldiers are tired, exhausted, right? It's getting close to 9:30 in the morning. The attack was launched at around maybe 4:35. He arrives there and he waits because he tried to storm barricades on his own, Morgan. So he will try to wait for his whole group to come with him, about 400 men total. But you remember that the British were regrouping in the city. So they will leave from Palace Gate, which is behind Morgan's troops. Morgan is stuck in front of a barricade, and slowly but surely, the British will arrive behind him, and they will cut him basically in a pincer. You will have a few defenders at the barricade, you will have the bulk of the British defenders. Morgan have no other choice than to surrender. It's the end of the battle before 10 in the morning. So that's the end of the battle for the Battle of Quebec, but it's not the end of the war, right? So at the end of the battle, you have about 400 prisoners. You have about 600 soldiers remaining, 700 considering, all considering. So what must you do? Now what? What's happening? The rebels were pushed back. Now what? Well, most of the soldiers will be imprisoned at in one of the king's redoubt. So that's a military building inside the city. The officers will be sent at the séminaire. The séminaire is a large building, so basically the place where priests were going to school. It's a large building close to the St. Lawrence River. It's going to be important. The officers and commanding NCOs, so the non-commanding officers of the army, were complaining of very bad situation at the séminaire. So they will say it's cold, they would say it's not looking good, and they will try to, well, have a prison break, basically. You know, the very classic, imagine a cartoonish prison break. What do you use if you are at the fourth floor of a building to try to get down that building? Sheets. That's what they did. They read the same comic books, or that you did. That's what they did, but they were caught. So we're in April now. It's been a couple of months that they were in prison. They were in prison because, well, that's what you do. There was no way to send them back to the United States. This probably, or the 13 colonies at that time, that's probably what they would have done. But there was no way to do that. So you had imprisonment at the Séminaire. Keep that in mind. The rest of the soldiers are not going to have better situation, but won't even have the small liberties that officers had that could provide them with sheets or tools, that the soldiers have nothing basically in their prison, right? And they will stay there. The British will use a wooden horse as a deterrent. So this is a small anecdote that is actually very funny, I think. It's not because it's the British that did that to the Americans. In whatever situation, I think 18th century, this would have been funny. So we're in the month of March, and basically the British at one point, they see that there's a few hundred soldiers who are trying to, attack the city from the outside. So at one point they bring a wooden horse, which was a type of military punishment for discipline. You could sit someone on the wooden horse. That was not pleasant. You were sitting there most of the time naked or naked from the waist up. You had ways waiting you down. It's a whole thing anyway. So they put a wooden horse and they put a sign on his neck and they put a small amount of hay at his feet. And the sign read basically, when this horse will have finished its hay, you will get the city. Pretty clever. Well, they were right, because it never finished its hay. So, at that very same time, keep in mind that the remaining Continental soldiers are staying here. First of all, they will give all the soldiers who have no contracts anymore, what will they do with them? So in the first days of January, they will basically give them a choice. You can resign and rejoin the Continental Army until the siege is over, or you can get lashes. And if you leave, you will be treated as a deserter. Then you die. Many people resigned. Can you believe that? So they were dealing with that. They were dealing with smallpox, which was still running rampant. You have many witnesses' diaries who are basically telling that some soldiers was staying large number of days at the Hôpital Général to get treated by the nuns there. Many were dying, but some survived. And at one point, the Continental Army, after all these troubles in January and February, they will decide that they need to be a little bit more active, so they will decide that they need batteries. They cannot get close to the city, so they take the next best thing. Same thing the British did in 1759. They will go on the south shore of the river and put cannons there. And they start to try to bombard the city. They don't have that many cannon, don't have that much powder, but what's going to be very interesting, you remember these officers that tried to leave the Séminaire? Well, they will put them at the bottom of some ships, and they will make sure that the Continental Army knows that their officers are tied at the bottom of some ships right in front of the city. So yes, they can bombard the city of Quebec. The ships are going to be in front. Let's see what happens. There will be battles still. Even if the Battle of Quebec is a failure, there are going to be battles mostly between loyalists, so French at that time, and a bit British, but mostly French, who are loyal to the British Crown, and French who are actually loyal to the Continental Army. For example, on the south shore of Quebec, the Battle of Saint-Pierre, this is March 1776, a few hundred men on each side. It's going to be a pretty bloody battle for that time in Quebec. Keep in mind, this is countryside. There's no roads going there. So it was really families going from parishes to parishes, getting people together. And it was basically a mob attack between two mobs, right? But it's still considered an attack. It's at the end of the siege. So there are still battles. Up to the very end, there is hope that there is going to be some form of reinforcements. But the Continental Army, when they know that, they will realize that they need to send a person. a person. That man is General John Thomas, whose mission is to basically bring the boys back in the 13 colonies. Okay, it's not to take. So the invasion is already deemed a failure in spring 1776. So it's going to be up to leaving Canada. In Quebec, there are extra defensive structures that are going to be built pretty early in 1776, including blockhouses, for example, on the Plains of Abraham. We are redoing blockhouses, so 2 stories, wooden building in which you can put 10, 12 soldiers as kind of sentries outside the cities. There are going to be battle, they said, in May 1776, right outside Montreal, or the Battle of Trois-Rivières, which is the city right between Quebec and Montreal, in June of 1776. This is during the retreat. Imagine, the British are starting to pursue, because General Thomas arrived in Quebec, and he was very angry. He was very angry because of the state of the troops, and he was angry because of another thing. People were getting inoculated from smallpox, and that was a big no-no for him. Inoculation is basically the ancestor of vaccines, right? So it's giving you a bit of the disease under your skin. So they were scraping the skin, putting some disease pus from, anyway, I said too much. Thomas was firmly against that. What is the fate, my oh my, of General John Thomas? He died of smallpox during the retreat. So this is interesting. But that retreat is going to be organized. The Continental Army will leave the shores, and the invasion of Canada will be a failure. A strategic failure in the short run. But look at what's going to happen. So death of General Thomas. Even though the invasion will prove beneficial in the long run. At the end of the retreat is the Battle of Valcourt Island. This is on Lake Champlain in October 1776. This is truly the last stand. At that time, Governor General Guy Carleton is rushing after the Continental Army. Not very much rushing, though, because it's October. Keep in mind, the siege has been lifted since May 1776. It took 2 months in the wilderness to Benedict Arnold to actually reach Quebec. It won't take them 4 months to actually get out of there, right? So they are taking their time. And Carleton cannot be as decisive as possible. So yes, it's going to be the Battle of Valcourt Island. It's going to be a British victory, but it won't annihilate the whole fleet. And the Americans, the 13 colonies, are going to be able to retreat. This will lead to 2 things. First, the British will decide that their army is not strong enough. They will send German troops in North America, up to 30,000 during the war, many of which decided to stay. For example, in Quebec, if you have a German-sounding name, there's a good chance it's an ancestor of these soldiers that stayed. We know that up to 2,000 German soldiers stayed in the province of Quebec right after the war. There's also going to be a large influx of loyalists. So in Canada, this is another consequence of that, loyalists from the 13 colonies. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. 1776, during the retreat, will directly lead to France implication. It's 1778. What happened? Well, because Guy Carleton was not decisive in its pursuit, the 13 colonies' Northern Army was able to regroup. Because they were able to regroup, they were able to launch the Saratoga campaigns in 1777. Because they were able to be very successful during the Saratoga campaigns, including against these new professional German troops, they were able to get the approval, the implication of France, secure that, basically showing them that they were an actual real force to be reckoned with. And because of France's implication, it really tipped the scale for the rest of the Revolutionary War. All right, keep that in mind. So, as I was saying, we know now that more than 40,000 loyalists get in Canada. There's over 80,000 loyalists in total that will leave the 13 colonies, so they will not all come to Canada. This will have also a huge change on the British colonies in North America. This is a direct reason why the province of Quebec will be split in 2. Lower Canada and Upper Canada. In Upper Canada, you have mostly English-speaking loyalists. So for the first time, it is that division. The French-Canadian population, even though the British wanted to assimilate them, they were never able to do that. But the fact that they now had a large British colony right on the other side was definitely good for their plans. It will cause problems throughout the 19th century for the British, leading that. But keep in mind, this is very important for the history of Canada as well, these input of loyalists. The war ends in 1783. the colonies get their independence, which will lead directly to the War of 1812. What happened during the War of 1812? Was Washington ever attacked by a foreign enemy? Keep that in mind, all right? So that was not the end of the trouble. I'm not saying this to boast or any way, shape, or form, but keeping that even if the War of Independence ended, all right, it was not the end of the trouble. It did not settle everything. It will take a good 100 years. It will take a good 100 years. The creation of Canada in 1867, that happens roughly at the end of the War of Secession, so the Civil War here in the States. After that, you can start to have this relationship that is going to be a little bit different, all right? This is why I always want to end this talk with this very astute, appropriate quote. Benjamin Franklin, during the negotiations for the treaties at the end of the war, had this very interesting quote, which is a loop back to the fact that Quebec was attacked for one last time on December 31st, 1775. That the United States on the continent were not attacked that much after the War of 1812. Yes, there was a civil war, but a foreign enemy was something you did not hear about that much, right? And it's a great, great luck, privilege that we have. Yes, our fellow citizens, both in Canada and in the United States, have known war in our lifetime. They took part in some wars. But for most of us, we do not know war on our land. And Franklin, at the end of the War of Independence, writing to a British diplomat, basically said this: there never was a good war or a bad peace. Meaning that a bad peace would also always be superior to bad war. On that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me this evening. It has been an absolute pleasure. I did not run too much over time, so that's good. Unfortunately, that will skip the question. No, I'm kidding. We have time for questions. If some of you have questions, please do, absolutely. As you can imagine, there will be lots and lots of things to discuss as with that. There might be things that you have felt that we only skimmed over, so please feel free to ask any questions that you have right now. Don't be too nice with the Canadian boy. I mean, I can take it. If there are no questions, don't worry. I'll still. Oh, I see a question there. Oh, please. That's great. We'll bring a microphone up to. For those of you who have questions, we'll bring a microphone. Please use the microphone. It's going to be easier for me. Yes, please.
So it's called the siege. It's called the siege of the plains.
Yeah.
Did it ever actually be a siege?
Yeah.
They did. Okay.
They did. When I was talking about the ice battery, yeah. You're right to ask that question, right? Keep in mind that when the Continental Army arrived, the siege itself proper began with the ice battery that I was talking about. So the proper siege. So it lasted nearly for a week with the ice battery, but they still had cannons after that. So it lasted for maybe like 2 to 3 weeks, right before the battle itself, all right? But when I say siege, it's not siege like the siege of Boston, for example. When you think about it, it's very hands-on, right? The army stays there, they fire cannons every day, no one can go in or out. Well, keep in mind that early in 1776, the British are still staying inside the city of Quebec. Even though they won, they know that the Americans, they know that the 13 colonies, the Continental Army, is still surrounding Quebec. So even though it's not a siege in the sense that there is a direct menace, a direct threat on the city of Quebec, keep in mind that the people inside the city very much live in a city under siege. So they will have, they cannot have they do not have liberty of movement. They cannot go out easily outside the city. You will have to have actual war parties going out of the city if you want to gather firewood, for example. So it might not be a siege in the sense that there are cannons firing, but to be fair, it is very much, in my understanding, a siege at that moment, which will last all the way up to the first week of May 1776, all the way to the moment where Thomas arrives and decides that we are out of here. Oh, see, we needed one.
Me, Peter. One of the books I did not read in high school had a cover of Benedict Arnold and his trip through Maine.
Yeah.
And it was like 7 men portaging doorways as they went up through there.
Yep.
And I just wanted you to speak a little bit about the trip, whether it was mostly on water, on land, or in between.
So about Benedict Arnold's trip, like in Maine, his expedition, if it was mostly on water or on land, it was mostly on water. Keep that in mind. It's very true for the whole duration. Most of the long distances are on water. They have bateaux, which are flat bottom, long boats. They're about 2 to 3 meters, so roughly like 9 to 10 feet long. And the widest spot, they are probably about, that's 5 to 7 feet wide, something like that. So small bateaux that you had a small crew on with supplies and everything. And this is going to be like one of their major problems, because the bateaux are going to be used as the major mode of transportation for the supplies. And when I did not, like, I tried to skim a bit here and there, but this is northern Maine in late October, early November. Rain, snow, wind, flash floods. So that meant that sometimes they were camping somewhere, and in the morning, their tents were like with 1 or 2 feet of water. Even though they were like far away from the riverbed, because these conditions were actual problems for them. So they lost supplies quite a lot, they lost bateaux quite a lot. You have to understand though as well, so even though it's bateaux and the ships, the rivers themselves, the Quebec River and most importantly the Chaudière River, are not that deep rivers. They are not like 25, 30 feet deep. In many places and spots, there are a few feet of water there. So if your ship tumble over, you probably can still survive, right? You probably are above water. That doesn't mean that you're not wet. On November the 4th in southern Quebec, and I live there, I would not do that. So yes, there were large carrying places and portage, but it's primarily on water.
So by the time of the Battle of Saratoga, it was pretty clear that the French were going to fight with us.
Yeah.
Do you think there was regret on the part of the Quebecois left in Quebec City over not joining the Americans?
If there was any regrets about the Canadiens, the Québécois, not to join the United States or the 13 colonies because the French joined them. I would say the same sentiment that I talked about, we can see it right after in 1776, 77, 78. So the very disappointing answer I'm about to give you is, were some people disappointed? Oh, you bet. Were some people not disappointing? Yeah, some people were, because they felt that their colony, their homes, which had been attacked and destroyed 15 years prior, were safe. Because now, because of that, they could, like the 13 colonies, with the help of the French, were focusing on the 13 colonies. They were not focusing on the province of Quebec anymore, right? And there were some people who were right there in between who did not know. And probably at the end, some of these people were not sure. Probably were going to them and saying, oh, are you happy or unhappy about the involvement of the French? And should we? Oh, yeah. I mean, we should have. It's obviously the French were on that side. We should have. It's the French. The call of the motherland, not the fatherland, or I don't like the genderless land. Or but I get that's mostly the idea. As far as historical documents go, we do not have specific proof of that. I will get into a little bit more specific in 1776. Okay, right after the invasion was over, the British authorities, they sent 3 lawyers around the city to basically go in each and every parish and do some sort of a report as to who was on the side of the British, who was on the side of the Continental Army, who were traitors basically to the crowns. And what happened in the end to all the traitors that were identified? Probably the harshest thing they had, their muskets or guns were confiscated. Why? Because they knew that they could not start to go around and hang like half the population, because it was, in some parishes, it was half and even more than half of the population that sided with the Continental Army. So it's not something that is very clear-cut. It's something that is very, hit or miss, I would say, between some of the French. But good question. Thank you. Other questions? There's one just in front, fourth row on your right. Oh, here, sorry, yes.
I had a question. You were talking about all the prisoners that were taken
Yeah.
and on the ship. Were they released when the Continental Army retreated?
Yep, the prisoners were released. In fact, this is very common in 18th century warfare. You have prisoners. Prisoners are basically mouths to feed. You don't want that. So most of the time you will release them with a promise to never take up arms during that same conflict against you. Do you think that order was very much followed? No. Most of the time soldiers, there's a part that will respect the fact that they were told not to fight ever again, and they will do that. But many people will decide to come back. For example, will be sent back by ships to Boston, to New York, basically in other parts of the colonies. But some of them will definitely take their weapons back. But keep in mind, in the case of the Revolutionary War, it's a little bit interesting as well, because the theater of war will shift quite a bit, right? Between the first years of the War of Independence, between the northern, theater, like from 75 to roughly 1780, but from 1779, I would say 1780, to 1783, it's much more the southern theater that is much more involved and get into it. So it depends. There are soldiers who fought during the whole war, and yes, there were some soldiers from different part of the colonies that were involved at different moments as well. So that's to think in mind. But it's very common. It's very, very common. Just to give you an idea, in 1759, so in Quebec, the British captured many French soldiers. They sent them to Great Britain. Many were sent then to France. So the noblemen usually stayed in France. It was their family, and when they were done, well, we're done with that. This is war. This is the old colonies, the old world. We will not get our privileges anymore. That's no good to us. But many of the inhabitants decided to come back. Yeah, that was typical. Yeah.
So were any of the citizens after the siege forced into enlistment to support the British?
So were any citizens after the siege forced into enlistment? The simple, very quick answer is no. At that moment, they don't feel the threat is present anymore, and there is going to be British regular regiments that are going to be present, as well as the German soldiers, right? Because I said so many, thousands of German soldiers will be used as the main garrison force. So for the rest of the war, there is not going to be a major enlistment of militia, for example. And the reason was pretty simple. Because of that report in 1776, the British authorities realized that they could probably not count on many, many supporters in the ranks of the inhabitants. Because those who were very convinced to defend the city were cold at best, right? It was because they wanted to defend their homes and their houses. It's not because they definitely wanted to protect the British crown. It was much more interested, I would say, and the British officers, the British governors, they knew that.
So you mentioned that the British had, I guess I'd call it professional recognition of the officers, prisoner of wars for the Continental Army.
Yep.
Was it reciprocal? Did the Continental Army do the same for the Brits?
I will be fully honest with you, because the Americans did not capture that many British officers during that time. I could not tell you if during the siege of Quebec that was the case. What I can tell you though, and I don't know how it is for the rest of the Revolutionary War, so take what I'm about to say with a major, super big grain of salt, all right? But what usually happened, if I take the French and the British, and I will be fully honest with you, if you come to Quebec, it's a much more sensible topic, the battle between the French and the British, than that deal with the Revolutionary War. Honestly, most of the people in Quebec had never heard of that before 2025 and 2026 because of the 250th anniversary. But if I go back to the French and Indian War, it was common. Officers had, for example, if a British officer was caught and sent to Quebec as a prisoner, most of the time he had way of the city. He could walk. He had to sleep somewhere, and that was it. So he could walk around the city. He had full liberty. The highest the officer, usually the most liberties you had. Keep in mind, there's a huge solidarity in Europe, all right? I will take about Europe because I really don't know about Revolutionary War and how it went. I guess there was some sort of liberty. That's my best informed guess, okay? But I'll leave it at that. But keep in mind, in Europe, there is a strong solidarity of, I would say, class between the officers. And one of the best example, and I will give you an example of that, in the 7 Years' War, right before the capture of Louisbourg, okay, the French fortress that was on the Nova Scotia coast, a French officer was having dinner with a British officer, and basically they made a wager who was going to capture Louisbourg. And at the end, if the French was winning, well, he was to receive a case of British ales. And if the British were winning, well, the officer had to give him a case of champagne. That's fun. That's your war. You say, oh, this is a good, yay, soldiers. What's going to happen? Well, it's the wager with the officer generals. So, but that gives you, I think, that is a bit enlightening, I would say, about that. At the back.
How did the French language and culture survive so many years?
Nah, that's a great question, but that's a very long question. I will try to be very quick about that, okay? How did the French and language and culture survive in Quebec for that many years, even though it was a British colony? So necessity, as I was saying, the British in the first couple of years had necessity of the French. This necessity stayed on for a number of years. If you go back to in 1792, the first debate of the Legislative Assembly that was given to the colonies, the first debate is about how the laws are going to be written in the colonies, and the Assembly decides that it was going to be, well, first English, but then English, and then translated to French, sorry. So keep in mind that there's an idea, there's kind of they know that they cannot be too harsh, too hard, all right? It's still English first at that time, but French is going to survive. And then it goes on and on and on, all the way up to there are going to be major social and political rebellions in 1837 in Quebec, all right? So in Lower Canada at that time. So the French basically want to overthrow the British at that moment. There are going to be a number of battles. And after that, the British government basically sends an officer who will write a report, Durham. And Durham basically says that, oh, these French, they have no culture, no history, we must assimilate them. But many of the politicians at that time will go against that Durham report, that part of the report. Just to say, because if they knew that if they were to implement that, there was going to be some major pushback, right? So this is one of the reasons. The other reason is that the political, I would say, the political strength or forces in society had way less influence than the Roman Catholic Church. For the longest time in Quebec, the Roman Catholic Church had much more influence than any political figure, any governor general or whatever. And these priests were mostly, first and foremost, French or French speaking, okay? So they were basically the glue that held society together all the way up to the 1960s. Because in the 1960s in Quebec, there was what we call the Quiet Revolution that basically kicked the Roman Catholic Church out of schools and hospitals and everything. And then that secular, political power that was out of the churches had this whole French history to base themselves on, and they wanted to keep that French culture. So this is a quick overview, but this today is still a very, it's a hot topic. It's still a hot topic, I'll be honest with you, yeah. It's because we are resilient, and because we fake speaking English like I'm doing tonight. And it's because our accent is very funny to the French. They don't understand us if we speak very fast. No, that's the last part of it, all right. That's not true. That last part was not true. Sorry. One last question, if there is one last question.
No last question?
No last question. Thank you very much. Many, many thanks. Thank you very much.
That was the absolute best answer to how did the French culture survive I've ever heard in my life.